welcome everybody. Hello, my name is Violet Berlin. Some of you older ones may remember my TV shows in the 90s and the noughties. In particular, Bad Influence back in the 1990s, where I had the best game ever, which was back then just to play games as a job when hardly anyone did it. I mean, more people do it these days. It's more of a known job. And little did I know, because we didn't have the internet, really, that amazing, inspirational female game designers like Brenda were like kind of knocking about. And if I'd had the internet, I would have sort of known about it. And it's odd for me that it's sort of more been in the years since doing Bad Influence that I've learnt a lot more about what was going on more widely at that time. But it was so exciting. And I think it's a gift that keeps on giving, because here I am, 25 years later, and I've got this marvellous opportunity to interview, to have a conversation with an amazing game designer that, just wouldn't have come about without that sort of boost of playing the games, of being on TV back then. So I'm feeling very lucky tonight, and thank you. It's like an honour to be having this conversation with you, and it's an honour to be invited here to the Centre of Computing History. So when I started thinking about what questions I would put to Brenda, there were so many, I was completely stumped. There was so much to say, there was so much to ask. You've got this amazing, I had to write down some of the highlights so I'd forget them all, so I'm just going to run through them briefly. So Brenda entered the industry back in 1981, working on Wizardry games. She's worked for companies from Certex Software to Atari, and from EA to like a number of mobile and social platforms. At the moment, she's the Programme Director of the MSc in Game Design and Development at Limerick University, and co-founder of Romero Games in Ireland, and she's an artist with a number of physical game design-inspired pieces on display and exhibitions. And also, Brenda's won more awards than I could possibly remember. In 2017, that's last year, Brenda was awarded the Development Legend Award at the Develop Conference, and also a BAFTA Special Award. In 2015, you got the coveted Game Developers' Choice Awards. And going back further than then, we'd be here all night. She's also in like almost every single top women in games list. In fact, I was at the British Museum about a month ago, and there there you pinged up again, and we're talking about women in games and game designers and inspirational figures. But I just did want to pick out one list that you're on, Brenda, just to finish with as my introduction, is that I noticed that you're on Nerve magazine's list of the top 50 artists, actors, authors, activists and icons who are making the world a more stimulating place. So that's a really cool one to end on. And with that, I'm just going to hand over to Brenda to give a little presentation about her life in games before we continue the conversation.
Thank you. That's quite the intro. Do you ever have somebody introduce you and you think it's got to be somebody else that they're talking about? I'll tell you, so this is, in this talk, this is a little bit about where I come from. And I clearly didn't come from anywhere that was going to end up with a BAFTA. I still have a lot of difficulty believing that I won a BAFTA. It seems very surreal to me. So now is the time for a technical problem. Hang on. Oh no, where's my tech support? This was totally working seconds ago. It really was, and then I looked down and it's not working. Help. Is there a guy who made Doom in the room? Where'd it go? I did. But we're in a computer museum. Why should it go right? It's this one.
Yeah, but you're trying to connect to there we go.
There, okay. Thanks, guy who made Doom. Okay, there. So this is just how I got into games and stuff that I'm thinking about a lot right now. I should warn everybody, I originally come from New York. I've had 4 shots of espresso. And so I tend to speak fast. Even when I say, I'm going to speak slowly, and I'm going to relax, and I'm not going to talk that fast, it'll speed up. It always does. So anyway, hopefully you can understand what I say. So for me, especially, it was great seeing back on that Apple II, the original Wizardry 1. I wasn't expecting to see it there. And this image, to me, this is sort of how I feel with all the cool stuff that's happening in tech right now. And I don't often get the same feeling. I don't often have this image in Wizardry 1, the very first Wizardry, playing this close to each other. And the first time I saw Wizardry come up on the screen and I saw color on a computer, and I realized I could play D&D on a machine by myself. Man, it was so much cooler than whatever she's seeing on that. But it is, like, for me, it's a really cool time to be in tech. And I think about, like, things that are in the news lately, like self-driving cars or drones. Recently in Ireland, which is where I live now, we all went absolutely mad during a storm because we couldn't get bread. And people, like, there's actually, just if you haven't figured this out, there's actually serious things that are happening during any given event, but Irish people will be talking about something that's not the serious thing, making it seem like it's a serious thing. So people were sending loaves of Brendan's bread to each other via drone. But drones are really cool, and then when I think about big data, which for me was a 10 megabit drive, like a 10 meg drive that you set your monitor on. But now it's very commonplace. And last year I became aware of the story of this place called Cloud Office Architecture, and their goal, believe it or not, is they're going to have this meteorite and they're going to capture it. This is their current. They really have a plan. They're really seeking investment, and it's going to orbit around the Earth, and you can actually have an apartment there. Which is cheaper than the apartments in London, I believe. So it's something to look into. But it's interesting to me when people say games are out there. And what I love when I came into this place, it was a little weird. Like we were having I was having an issue because I forgot my presentation, and we were trying desperately to get it from my phone to anything that would play. Anyway, we clearly got that sorted. But I come in here, and so I've got all this going on, but I'm a hardcore nerd. Right? And I want to go see every one of the computers. I want to go to the 1970s office. I want to check out the games that I haven't seen since they shipped. And I'm fascinated to see like people I recognize, like Carol Shaw, Waz, obviously, Ada Lovelace, and Hedy Lamarr. And to see, I know I'm just naming women, but that's because it's something that's very important to me. These are some of my early role models. And so to see. I didn't make this slide before I did make this slide before I got here. I didn't change it, but really, for me, like technology is the story of the people who made it, especially the lead designers and the innovators and all of us. So this is me. I still haven't really, I'm sitting much more like a lady, but at that point in time, and I've never really mastered it, and I don't particularly care, but that's me at the age of, I think, 4 or 5. And so that's when I start to become a game designer, believe it or not. And here's how I become a game designer. So as a kid, I grew up in the States, obviously, and we have, I guess you'd call them boot sales, but we have yard sales, which is where we throw all our stuff on the lawn on Saturday or Sunday. It's not mandatory. It might be now. I haven't been there for 3 years. Crazy things are happening. But you throw everything on the lawn and you sell it, and we had very little money. So my mother would give me sometimes a dime, sometimes a quarter, and with that money, I would be able to get games. And board games, if they had all their parts, were more expensive, but the ones that didn't have all their parts weren't. And so I just basically collected my own parts. And then from these parts, I would make my own games. And I don't remember the birthday, but I'm going to guess it was like 9 or 10. Somebody got me a brand new Monopoly game, and I was so excited because it was a fresh board, meaning I took it out of the box and I flipped it over, and I couldn't wait to make a new game, which was clearly not what they had intended. And I still have a fairly large collection of board game parts, and I would be shocked if in my laptop bag there's not at least some dice, because everybody should always have a D20, I guess. Speaking of D20s, when I was 11, my mother in 1979, my mom got me this Dungeons and Dragons, and when I was 11, she got me Dungeons and Dragons, and it is impossible to overstate both my absolute passion for this game. I still have it. I still have that original white box. And so when Stranger Things came out, it was like somebody broke into my life. Like I was every one of those nerdy kids. And I remember people saying things to me at the time, like, that's when you got weird. And I was like, nowadays, like I saw a shirt out front And there's the word geek on it. Like, I remember people calling me a geek. They're like, you're a geek. You're a nerd. Like, you like code, right? And none of these things were, you want to be a game designer, right? Like, none of these things were cool. Now, if I go, if I get invited into a school to talk to kids, it's like, you're a game designer? Can I have your autograph? And they don't even know what I've made, right? But this just sounds so cool now. It wasn't cool at the time. So all of these geeks were me. And then I started playing Rollmaster when I was 14. So Rollmaster, I didn't like the way it actually handled encumbrance. So I decided to rewrite the rules for encumbrance, which, how many of you are coders? All right, so when you decide to make one change to something and it breaks everything else? So that's precisely what happened when I removed encumbrance from a system dependent upon it. So anyway, I rewrote the entire thing, and we actually played it for several years. And then this is actually where I got my job, really. It really is. So I grew up in northern New York, where it's under 10, 12 feet of snow at any given moment. And I smoked, which I also don't advocate, and I don't do, but I smoked at the time. And so this girl came into the bathroom, and she was looking for a cigarette. And to be polite, we struck up a conversation. And the conversation went sort of like this. Do you have a job? No. Have you ever heard of Surtech? No. You ever heard of Wizardry? No. You ever heard of D&D? Yeah, I play. And that's how I got my job, really. And so by the age of 16, 15, actually, I was in the game industry. And this was the first game I worked on, which they had back there, Proving Grounds of the Matter Overlord. It doesn't look amazing here by today's standards, but man, my brain was on a great trip with this. And that's a picture of the box there. And so my mother at the time, she was so supportive of me because I was getting exposed to things that I couldn't possibly ever have afforded at home. And this, because it was 1981 at the time, we had no money. And this was my first boyfriend. If I had to do, I started coding in BASIC, and if I had to do things twice, I would try to write a program for it. I absolutely fell in love with it. I genuinely remember, I had a manual. Somehow I got a Z, I forget, I want to say it's a Z200. Anyway, it was a PC, it emulated PCs. And one of the most exciting things for me was finding a new command, and I was going to try to figure out what it did and try to use it in something. And I absolutely loved code. So I convinced my school to offer a coding class in BASIC and then in Pascal, which Wizardry was done in USDC Pascal. So I felt, or UDSC, UCSD, I always get that. It was in Pascal with 4 letters before it. Anyway, it was done, quiet doom guy. Anyway, I thought that's what I probably should learn. I ended up taking assembly language when I was in college. I didn't stick with it, but I got through it. Anyway, we worked on a lot of cool games during that time. That's where I went to school. I put myself through school doing that. And at the time, I never saw myself as a woman in a man's world. Never occurred to me. Because interestingly enough, my world at the time was mostly women. So half women. This is a picture of Surtech Software, the company just before I joined it. So you can see it's half and half. And it winnows down to eventually it's just me and Linda there who's in the front. I'm the one in the back. And so it's me and I go from half to me, just me in a smaller group, to just me in a much larger company. But here's the thing, it felt normal to me. It didn't feel odd, it just actually felt normal. And so years later, I went to work for a company that was actually majority women. And it felt super bizarre. And not that it was wrong, right? I just wasn't used to it, so it felt very weird. And I hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about my gender because to me, I'm a game designer. If you ask me what I am, I will say I am a game designer. I will not say, oh, I'm a female game designer, because that just feels bizarre. So around, this is a slide that tells you apparently what I think of 1990. In 1990, it's near about as I can tell, I started getting questions like this. What's it like to be a female game designer? Or what's it like to be a female programmer? What's it like to be a woman in tech? And as if there's one answer to that question, if you can imagine somebody who said, what's it like to play games as a woman? Well, there's an interesting one. But if somebody said, what's it like to play games as a woman? And I said, so how many women in the audience play games? Right? So just imagine that the question actually was, what game is women's favorite game? And I said, everybody. You guys, I'll answer it for us, okay? You'd be like, oh, you better say my game then, because otherwise, like there's not obviously one answer, right? Like one of my favorite game designers, creative director, she's such a powerhouse, Amy Hennig. She was with Naughty Dog for years, Uncharted. She's absolutely a legend. Also won a BAFTA. And funny enough, when they awarded me the BAFTA, I said, well, they send you a letter and this whole thing. I'm like, why aren't you giving it to Amy Hennig? They said, because we gave it to her last year. So, okay, good. That made me feel all right. Anyway, so Amy, if you talk to Amy, she will tell you that she's had a great time in the industry. Largely really hasn't had any issues. But I've heard of other stories that are, just terrifying. And I myself have had a largely good experience in the game industry, which is not known necessarily for great experiences. But there has been, like I'll tell you about a story that I think is pretty representative, and this is one that happened to me. I was talking to an industry giant, this is years ago, and this guy, he made games in a similar genre that I specialized in. And if you've ever been around somebody, like you're in a public situation and you're talking to somebody who you, worship's too strong a term, but you are unbelievably respectful of this person's work. And I'm also, I don't know what it was, but I wanted people to go like, do you see who I'm talking to? Like, look at me, I'm talking to this guy, this is so cool. Anyway, so we're talking for a while, and I still can't believe I'm talking to him, and he moves his coat over. And there it is. There it is. He obviously has an erection. And he says, and I quote, do you want to do something with it? And a life spent in front of a computer had not prepared me with any answer for this question. And I still don't remember what I said. I didn't do anything with it, right? But I didn't know what to do, right? I felt kind of like, I don't know if this phrase is appropriate, but I felt kind of like a deer in the headlights. Like I didn't know what to do with it, right? Like this is my whole world. And so somehow I get out of this situation, and I remember saying, as we're walking back through the conference, I remember wanting to like push every other woman out of the way, like he's loaded, like he's sprung like back away from this crazy guy. And that's just one story, right? But there's other things that I get, like what would you say to women who want to be in tech? Would you be on our women's panel? Would you like to be our diversity speaker? And then there's like statements that get debunked, like women just don't like tech. Women just don't like code. Women just, and there's, it's can I swear? Yeah. It's it's bullshit, right? Like actually, if you see my YouTube, you know that I'm just making sure I can't, but it can. But it's bullshit. It's not true. None of it's true. Anyway, so like women don't like tech, and you've all heard some random dumb thing. And an interesting thing that I discovered is, although I was doing a lot of work in games still, a lot of stuff was much more about my gender, and so the questions that I would get. And so I gave this name I gave it the term the female tax. Like John's Native American. He's Yaqui. His father's full-blooded Yaqui, and his mother's part Cherokee. And his family comes from Mexico. He has, to my knowledge, never been asked, what's it like to be a Cherokee game designer? So anyway, this is you're tomorrow night. I'm sorry for putting you on. But it's not just me that it happens to, right? It's an interesting thing, and the thought is like actually this is free stuff. People are paying attention to your work. But the reality is that if we figure out the math, if 40% of the time I'm talking about my gender, I have to I have to do that much more to get noticed for work. And if you make games that you don't sell, like my board games. All right, that sort of stuff is actually important. And it's not just me, it happens to anybody who's perceived as an other. And probably, it even happened at the Oscars, where guys would come up and they would say, oh, tell me about your fantastic role. How does it feel to win an Oscar? Woman walks up, what are you wearing? Not what are you wearing, who are you wearing? And the stupidest one to date, so you may know Amal Clooney. In this specific picture here, she was just leaving the European Court of Human Rights, and she was arguing, it was a challenge to an appeal on the genocide of 1.5 million people. And a reporter asked her who she was wearing. It's astounding. And what if they had asked her this instead? Here's a woman that's changing the world. Recently, she was at the United Nations, and she's presenting a case on ISIS, and Time decides to talk about her baby bump, that she's there showing off her baby bump. Like, I don't actually think that's what she was doing. Now, while I'm saying all this, like, I think that panels that things that talk about diversity and things that talk about race and sexuality and culture, like all these things are really important. I'm doing it right now, right? Like, I'll think we want role models to look up to, but I don't think that's all we are, and I don't want to be limited to that. So anyway, I was asked if I would write an article for Gamma Sutra on being a woman in games. So I said, sure. And I decided to take a different turn on it. So I started asking some of my friends questions. What's it like to be a male game designer? And these are the actual questions I got. What? Answers, rather. That doesn't make any sense, Brenda. What? And so then I doubled down, though. What advice do you have for men looking to break into tech? Like, it just sounds stupid when you put it on the other shoe. So they said, you're being serious. Is this a joke? So there's all kinds of things. And I think, ultimately, like this big spoiler alert is, to my knowledge, at least, while I'm awake, my reproductive organs have never made a game design decision, ever. I never said I want to grow up and make games as a woman. I've never said I want to play games as a woman. I don't know that I actually have any gender-based goals. For instance, I never said I want to be a superstar at giving birth, although I did give birth to twins at week 39, thus making me a superstar. I also have never said I want to have the best menopause ever, although the closer I get to it, the more I think I actually kind of do. So this is not to say that I am not grateful for these things. Like I saw just how powerful this was at QuakeCon in 2014. This is John dressed with a guy dressed as a hot dog. But there's a good story behind this. So the guy dressed as the hot dog, he was standing off to the side. I mean, he was quite a ways away. He was probably maybe where those machines were, but I could tell he would walk like half the way and then he'd turn around. And so I said to him, I mean, it was QuakeCon, right? So John worked on Quake, so made Quake, designed Quake. And so there's a bunch of people around him, but this one guy, I said to him, are you a fan of the game? And he said, no. I mean, I am a fan of the game, and he was really just stumbling over his words. And so he finally tells me that when he was growing up, what meant such a difference to him is that he could look at John, and he could see that John was Mexican. And he knew that John's, we all know him as John, but his real first name, this is a good id software. What's John's real first name? Does anybody aside from you know? No. It's Alfonso Juan Romero. So this guy knew that he was Mexican. And he said because he could see that he was Mexican, he knew that he could do it too. And that meant so much to him, just seeing that. So I understand the need for role models. And you may know of Gordon Ramsay, and he has a restaurant in London called, it's his flagship restaurant. And this is the person holding down these 3 stars. This is Claire Smith. So it's a 3 Michelin star restaurant. She's been cooking there for a while. And I want to say it doesn't matter to me that she's a woman, but it does. And I don't know why, because I don't even know how to cook. But it matters to me. Like, I think that's really great. We want to see people on the ladder who are similar to us. And I don't need to be told. I don't need Claire to get up and tell me what it's like to be a woman chef. I just think of her as an amazing chef. And I think we all need role models, whether that's in whatever it's in, whether it's in tech, games, or whatever. But if we think about games, even our most iconic characters, and this is me growing up, like when I first grew up, I couldn't even select a female character in a game. Like Wizardry, you don't get to select a female character in a game. And so, here's Princess Peach. Like, what if she was a self-rescuing princess, right? Or what if she was going to rescue this guy? Instead, this is my Photoshop abilities, my apologies. That's as good as it gets. If you Google game avatar, this is the first image that you get. That's game avatar. Those are your heroes. And if you think that's it, this is the second image that you get. So basically, it's a white guy who doesn't really shave. And the message to this really is, you don't belong. Recently, and thank goodness they pulled this back, but Ubisoft said that they couldn't do, and these are like just light examples, right? They said they couldn't do this, they couldn't have female assassins because they couldn't animate them. Well, I think there's like basically one difference between my body and yours, right? And so these were actually getting cosplayed. And, like, now that's saying, like, things are getting better. We do have different role models. But here's, like, this is a typical female in a game, right? Like, I don't know about you, but if my house is getting broken into, I'm not going to be like, honey, get the chainmail thong, right? Like, that's not the way I'm going to go out. And if we contrast this with male heroes in games, right? They're built like they're buff guys. But, all that said, it is getting better. We're starting to see a lot more representation of a lot of different people in games, and I think that's pretty awesome. In my own game, the one I'm working on now, which I can't say anything about, I actually got rid of gender. Like whether you pick a male or female, I don't care who you pick. Be who you want to be. I don't care. Your gender it's just, I even thought about having this random slider, right? And then I just thought, I don't care. Be who you want to be. Why do I have to hand you an envelope to get into in the beginning of the game? But outside of the game world, things are still kind of weird. So if we consider the population, we're half. Women are half of the population, 59% of the Silicon Valley workforce. But we're less than a third of tech workers. And then it gets even worse because a tiny little percentage of us are in positions of leadership. And that means like the tech decisions that are being made largely by other people. I don't know if you guys have seen two of the things that I think that just blow my mind. And you can find these on YouTube, but do you know that seatbelts were not designed with women in mind? Right? They were not designed with women in mind. If any of you women happen to have breasts and have tried to go like, oh my God, right? Well, surprise, they were not made with you in mind. There's also plenty of machines where you put your hand underneath it and you get soap, unless you're black. You don't get soap then. It doesn't recognize. These are on YouTube, right? So hands at a certain shade of brown, right? You just don't see it. And these are things that are, so it's important that there's representation there. And I think sometimes I've even struggled to have my voice heard. So one of my favorites is John Romero's wife. And this actually spawned poems. This is like a huge deal. And then it's sometimes fun to be on the internet. This guy is asking, you can't see this, so we'll make it bigger. She's the wife of John Romero, creator of Doom, so wouldn't that mean her husband could snack her neck? You can snack my neck anytime. Sorry, we're just having a private moment. If he could snap her neck if he wanted to, it would just no, but he couldn't teach you how to spell and use grammar, right? So sometimes there's really exciting things if you watch Father Ted. That's my opinion on it. Recently, I was also at a conference where I was invited to speak. I was actually also getting an award there. And so I'm his wife, and I'm proud to be his wife, but man, I've put in a lot of years in this industry, so I love this. Then it was his wife, Brenda's turn. With her hubby clocking up more than 35 years at the coalface of game dev, it was apt her talk was about not to burn out. I've been in the industry longer than John Romero. And so anyway, the myths in game worlds, I think, are pretty fun. They're more ridiculous than the ones we tell people in the real world. Some of the ones I've heard, women don't play games. 93% of games are purchased by women. The average gamer is a 43-year-old woman. Casual games and social games absolutely did all kinds of stuff for that. Another one I hear all the time, especially in Ireland, girls aren't good at math or IT. And I think back to a conversation that my daughter had once when somebody said to her, girls don't play games, or people who just said, yeah, girls aren't necessarily good at math. And a study has recently shown that girls actually are good at math and IT unless they're told they're not. And then they will live up to it and they will fulfill that. Another thing that I think is fascinating is gender bias in code. I don't know if you've heard about this study that was done. It's an amazing thing. So what they ended up doing is they studied a ton of different code, and they show that women's code, generally, people said it was better than men's code, unless their genders were known. And if their genders were known, it was said to be worse. And so, which is kind of interesting, because women have played a huge foundational role in computer science. Grace Hopper, Lois Mitchell, Kay McNulty, who is an Irish-speaking woman who came from County Donegal, and she was part of the programming team, the all-female programming team that built the ENIAC. And so Frances Allen, Kathleen Booth, who, she came up with the first assembly, and if you've ever tried to code an assembly, it's non-trivial. So many schools, interestingly enough, what I find is challenging, don't actually offer engineering courses. So if there's girls and boys school, often girls will get home ec and boys will get engineering. And so I've actually talked with lecturers who have said things like, I find boys are better prepared. Well, give them a 4-year head start and see how, like, I wouldn't be surprised. So for me, when I think about the story of games and the story of technology is the story of individuals, I feel at this point, I feel like, okay, I've done the BAFTA, I still want to keep making games, not that I was planning to get a BAFTA, but for me, like, one of the things that I think is really important is I'm actually trying to get more girls into games and more girls into tech, because somebody is going to make the next Minecraft. Somebody's going to be the next Carol Shaw. Somebody's going to be the next Amy Hennig, and I really want anybody who wants in to be able to get in. And I want us to see pictures like this and not think like, oh, look, it's girls coding. And to actually see a picture that's like, oh yeah, it's people learning how to code. And we don't see the picture, we just see something, we don't see the people in the picture because it just actually seems normal. And I want to create an industry that feels really good for anybody who wants to come in. And so that school kids come in and they become entry-level developers, and then they, grow up to become veteran developers. Because when I think about me in this picture, right, like at this point, I'm a poor kid, I've got some board game pieces, and I have no idea that I'm going to leave this tiny little town, and then somehow, shockingly, end up with a BAFTA. So if it could happen to me, it can happen to anybody. And that's that. We'll go back to the full class picture.
Well, thank you. I cannot tell you how much some of your stories resonate with me in terms of being a woman in the games industry, in terms of not seeing yourself as being odd, but like perhaps other people coming up and othering you in that way. And it's really wonderful to to have a conversation, but I want to sort of pull it away from the girls in games, as you've said, to find out about you as a games player, as a games designer, and then to drill down into some of that. So to start off with, I mean, obviously, right back in the early days, you were into Dungeons and Dragons.
Still
and role-playing games. Oh, that was what I was going. Is that your sort of? Are you still into them? Is that your main kind of game you're into?
Let's see. Main kind of game. I am the current type of games that I love playing. I've been really into narrative games lately, like Edith Finch, Florence. Those are two of the games that I played recently that I just loved. I'm somewhere, I don't know where I am. I want to say I'm in the middle, but I'm playing Night in the Woods right now. It's on this computer. It'll be finished before I get home.
That's literally, I downloaded it last night.
Oh, did you?
So, yeah.
Yes, I've been into those games. My actual, we played D&D, and once again, we have a group Tuesday nights, and John and I both had to back out of it because of other stuff we're doing at work. The game is happening at work, but I've had a couple big milestones, so I just can't be there for every game. And I don't play RPGs much anymore. And you know why? I find the older I get, like when I was younger, it was really easy for me to go, this weekend is about World of Warcraft, right? Or whatever. And I could play whatever, like I'm saying, World of Warcraft came out in 2002? 4? Okay, so I've got to go further back. This weekend is about Eye of the Beholder. I can't do that anymore. So I will actually go, I'll find out about a game, I'll hear good buzz about it, and then I put into Google, how long does it take to beat this game? And there's a whole site just devoted to that. And if it's around 5 or 6, those are the games I want to play. I love being able to finish games again. Like I've got 4 kids at home. I own a company. I don't have time for destination games. So narrative games I'm pretty heavy into at this point in time.
So it sounds to me, though, that even like back in the days of D&D, that story was a really important aspect to you then. It was like the story, finding out the story.
It was, but I like system-heavy games. Like if you left me on my own and said, well, like, what do you like to play? I love to play narrative games right now. Mm-hmm. What do I like to design? Systems. Mm-hmm. So I don't care about the story if I'm designing a system. It shouldn't matter. In fact, I should be able to pull the story off of it. That doesn't make any sense, but that's absolutely the truth.
So does that mean you're quite like a methodical player? I mean, have you ever done anything like rage quit? Or, what kind of a player are you?
I can't play shooters in my household, largely because I live with a professional player. So I have Rage Quit. I have, like, Ghost Recon is my favorite shooter to play, in which I can shoot him. But I don't know why, but I've never rage quit. I've never I've walked away from a game like, just, this is bad design, and I'm not playing this game. Or I don't like it or whatever. But if we're playing shooters, I'm really jumpy and I can get scared easy. And for some reason, I've destroyed a mouse so many times. It's like, God, bam! And I don't know why the mouse has to take it. It's so funny to say that, but yeah, I wreck he destroys keyboards though.
Really?
Oh, yeah, well, he actually recently, the funniest thing is it wasn't even the keyboard's fault. He thought there was something wrong. I have a mic and I'm telling your stories. He thought there was something wrong. He got very angry at his keyboard because there was some kind of lag or something. It wasn't even the keyboard's fault. He said, I put this on Twitter because this is the stupidest quote ever. He said, the more I hit this keyboard, it was something.
Yeah, you can beat on the keyboard, that stops working for a while, and then it reconnects.
Right, and he was mad that he beat on the keyboard and it stopped working. Right. So anyway, he basically took the keyboard. He was deathmatching. We have deathmatch in our office every Thursday night. And he took the keyboard and he like cracks it in half over his knee, right? And he's just furious at this. So he gets another keyboard. There's a guy in our office who is one of Ireland's top players. So anyway, John was getting his ass kicked. So smash. So I went around and I'm picking up all the pieces. And this museum would have been proud of me. While they're still playing, I hung it up downstairs on the wall with a little plaque, and then had the keys distributed around it. And I took a picture and I put that on the internet while he's still doing this. And a museum contacted me and said, "Can we have the keyboard?" So a real museum, and I forget where. It's Anne's Museum. Anyway, I forget where. I think it's Sweden. Is it? So anyway, I sent that. They had him autographed keyboard, destroyed keyboard. Officially Romero destroyed.
So I'm taking from that you're not the biggest rage quitter in your house,
no,
at the very least. Yeah.
I don't think nobody in our house is a rage quitter. I mean, just ragers, yeah, maybe, but not rage quitting, no.
So are you a completionist? Are you a collector, a completionist?
Is
that why you want to play short games or games that you know that you can kind of get to the end of?
Yeah. It is, but I'm not a completionist. In fact, I deliberately pay no attention to achievements that I'm getting. Because I feel like I have this love-hate affair with achievements as a designer, so let's just say, how many of you played Edith Finch? It's a beautiful game. If you haven't played it, I deeply recommend it. It's probably one of the best games I've ever played, really. It's in the top 5. And so if I'm thinking about it as the designer, you could look at that and go, oh, you know what? Those 4 chairs are empty, and I bet if I sit in every one of those 4 chairs, I'm going to get an achievement, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't want the player thinking about collecting, do stupid stuff. I want you to follow the narrative and enjoy the game and not worry about that sort of stuff. So I don't care about that. I just want to finish the game. But am I a collector? John and I have a problem. Yeah. we have our fairly huge lifetime collection between the two of us. And we started getting rid of things that were doubles, and that's it. Okay, we do not need doubles. That would be nice. 10s. But we started getting rid of some stuff that we have too many of. And then I realized, we don't have that Wolfenstein. And so so we would put something on eBay, and then it would go to the PayPal account. But I'm looking on eBay at the same time, and I'm like, we don't have the Japanese PAL version of that. We don't have, and so I actually think that I've gotten rid of 2 things, and we probably have 20 things. Like the Doom verification masters that are over in that case, those were on eBay. And I got them. I was going to sell the house to get those. That's the first known copy that's the first outside of the actual source disk. That is the first copy of Doom ever made over there.
Wow.
In that.
Whoa.
And that showed up on eBay, and I showed it to John, there's no way this is true. He's like, oh my God, that's true. So anyway, we got them.
So collectors in real life, but not in video games?
No, I don't care about it in video games at all.
So I'm wondering, maybe we can talk a bit about your early life in games when you first got in. I mean, you mentioned in your talk that you got the job at the Wizardry helpline from being in the toilets.
I did,
and playing games.
Yeah.
I mean, what was that like when you first got on the Wizardry helpline?
Well, so this is pre-internet, right? So the goal was you would play, if people got stuck, they would call. And I would say, well, depending on the time, 315-393-6633. And I would say Wizardry helpline, and you would say, help, I can't get to the wizard on the 10th level. I mean, to this day, if you have a question about Wizardry 1, 2, and 3, I know the answers.
Okay, all right. Has anyone got a question about Wizardry? No questions? Well, how do you get to the wizard on the 10th level?
Well, you have to, okay, all right, so from the first floor, you probably need a party of 6, and you should be higher level, but we'll assume you can make it. You go to the dark area, which is at the end of the level. You go down the hallway, go this way, and it's across there. You take 8 steps back, that's the elevator. That elevator is going to take you to the 4th floor. From the 4th floor, you have to come down the hallway. You've got to defeat the monsters here and get the blue ribbon. The blue ribbon will let you get into the private elevator. Private elevator will take you up to level 9. When you walk out level 9, there's going to be a spot in front of you, and there's going to be a door right here. You need to take this door. There's going to be an encounter here. It's a room that's composed of 4 squares. So kitty corner, you want to go to this thing. There's going to be a teleporter there that brings you down to the 10th level. There will be a series of 7 hallways leading to 7 rooms. The last of those 7 hallways and 7 rooms is Wordna. And if you beat him, you win the game.
Woohoo!
But it's my brain, like I have a whole tons of cells are wasted on, but God, if there's ever a total internet outage and people are playing on Apple IIs and there's phones, I'm the one.
Well, we've got the old dial phone in the 70th office over there. We could maybe get someone to volunteer to test if that actually works. So, I mean, I remember, like you say, back before the internet, I didn't even know they had helplines, and I got really stuck in the very first ever Legend of Zelda game.
A lot of them
really
charged money. We didn't. You had to pay the long distance charge, but it was interesting. Like doing that sort of stuff was interesting because sometimes people would write in letters. Their discs would arrive corrupted, and there's characters on there that they've put hundreds of hours into. And they would write you these big, long letters about why you needed to save their characters. And if you did save their characters, you would get thank you letters. And then on the flip side, mind you, we're still talking about Dungeons and Dragons and Wizardry. And so we would get letters from concerned people, right? Fearing, I'm wearing a dress about the witch trials. Perfect. But we would get letters, from people concerned for our soul, that we were working on these games. And people who are deeply concerned about that. And I mean, I still listen to Black Sabbath, and I'm mostly fine.
So basically, you were devils to, like, some of the people who wrote in, and angels to the rest.
Yeah.
Who were actually solving their problems.
But people, like it was like, I'm so lucky to be where I was when I was. Like I didn't have any concept that I was at the beginning, that I was lucky enough to be at the beginning of the game industry. Like Wizardry now, like a lot of people haven't even heard of Wizardry, but it's Wizardry that goes on to inspire Final Fantasy. It is and if you like any JRPGs, if you like Chrono Trigger, they all draw their line back to Wizardry. Peter Molyneux was inspired to get into the game industry because of Wizardry. He was absolutely, just mad about it. So I was so lucky, and it wasn't through like when you did the introductions, right? Like it wasn't through any when I grow up, I'm going to be a BAFTA award-winning game designer. No, it was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever, and I want to do it all the time. And I just kept doing it. And one would hope after you've done it for a while that you would get decently good at it.
So when you sort of started off, and you went then presumably from the helpline to actually kind of starting to design the games, and then you were lead designer on Wizardry 8. Weren't you? That's right?
Well, I did. So there was a design team, right? And we all worked together. So it's hard to say lead to anything. But I did. The story was mine, and let's see. The story was mine. All the text was mine. With one exception, all the levels were mine. The city names were mine. The quests were mine.
How did you?
Yeah, I guess I did a lot of it.
How did you design levels? I mean, did you? I mean,
graph
are there
paper.
any game design students in? Maybe small raise of hand, anyone? Yeah, so presumably nowadays, there's very well regarded, computer systems and all the rest for doing that. But I mean, how did it work back then?
For me, I still do this when I'm designing a level. I still do it on graph paper. So I would actually draw the level out. And I wish John and I wish we had talked about level design, because he always talks about asymmetrical level design. And I loved symmetrical level design. I love going into castles and everything just looks neat and orderly. But the problem with symmetrical game design is once you've discovered half the level, now you know exactly what the other half looks like because you've already done this half. But I would start on paper, and I would start with the conflict. So usually if you've got a lot of games, and I still do this, a lot of games there's an object. So let's just imagine, what's the object? Make it up, it doesn't matter what it is.
Square?
It's a square?
I don't know.
Okay, but it's a very important square. It's a square of destiny, obviously. Okay, so there's a square of destiny, and the square of destiny's in a room, and we can't get to it. Why? Yes, I'm looking. The wizard's got the square of destiny, or he's protecting it? She or he? She is protecting it. So in theory, we could just walk up and say, wizard, I would like the square of destiny. Can I have it? Mm-hmm. Why won't the wizard give it to me?
Because he's mean.
Okay, he's mean, and he wants, I knew you'd look up eventually, he wants what?
I have no idea.
He wants a sentence. But anyway, I usually start by designing backwards. And so there's this very important object. Why can't you have the object? Because it's in a locked room. Well, give me the key. You can't get the key. Why? Because you're not part of this specific group. How do I become part of this specific group? Nobody really knows, but there's this one specific person who might have an idea, and they live over here, right? And so I will often, now in this design backwards, probably 90% of what I get is garbage. But that 10%, like I chip away the other stuff like it's stone, and that 10% is usually good. And then I'll also think about how I want the player to feel. And depending on the game, I think about how I can go for their jugular. Like how can I make you really concerned? Like in Wizardry 8, you create parties. And so you've got these 6 characters. And in Wizardry, you would never screw with anybody's party, right? Like, I mean, you might stupidly take your party into a place and get half of them slaughtered, but that's your fault. But in Wizardry, now this is back in the old days of RPGs where you had to rest. And so you take your characters, you're resting by a camp, and you'd wake up. And when you woke up, one of your characters was just gone, right? And I know the feel, like if this had happened to me, I would have been like, what? And your character was just gone. And so I knew, and this is like also wonderfully pre-internet, so you couldn't like, WTF, character gone, right? So I knew people were going to be freaked out, and I actually had an NPC in the game who had taken one of these characters and held the character hostage until you did something for him. And it was such an amazingly impactful moment. But I'll do things like that, but also sometimes like I'll watch testers play the game. And this one guy was playing the game, and I found out that there was 2 opposing sides, and I found out somehow that he was actually able to go very far in the quest chains of both. And he was hoping that the 2 sides were going to somehow come to a peace agreement. And at this point, I had written the ends of the games. He just hadn't been there. And it had never occurred to me that would be a possibility. So I actually wrote this entire other, and this is a non-trivial decision for a game designer to do this, I wrote this entire other arc of the game where if you got these 2 people together, you could actually form peace between these groups. And it resulted in like 3 extra end games. And it was all because of this one idea this tester had.
So that held then, sort of designing with your graphs and by these
yeah,
methods,
I still do
all
that.
the way through all the different game series like Jagged Alliance, it was the same for that?
Well, Jagged Alliance, I did a lot of writing, but so I don't know necessarily how they did the individual spaces, but they're all grid-based, so they would have had to use something similar to that. But that would have been Ian Curry, Linda Curry, and Sean Ling. But I did a lot of the writing for the characters. In that case, my only trick that I would do there is I actually speak in the voice of the characters when I'm writing them, which is just phenomenally embarrassing. But I'll also, like we were listening to a podcast on the way here, and there was a character's voice. And I just loved that voice. I'm like, I am absolutely, so I've got the podcast on my phone, and I'm totally writing the character with that voice. And it's funny, like the amount of voices. My voice is in accidentally so many games, because we just like there's one Ravenwood Fair, which was a social game that John and I made, and there was it was like, look, we don't have much time. This has got to be finished in 2.5 months. Can you just record this? And so I recorded this little like, that's okay, right? And just or there was some others like, hello, or it's just a little like, hello. Right, and these things are still in this game. And now in the game, my voice is in there for what? And I hear it in the office all the time, what?
So would you say then that as a game designer, you've kind of come up with your own methods or a methodology? I mean, now you teach, or you're in charge of, or you're director of the MSc at a university. So you must have an overview of all the different ways that people design games. Do you feel that you've sort of developed your own? And
well, we didn't really have a choice, right? Like, you know, I know you guys are students, and I think, like, oh my God, how lucky. Like basically, I learned by doing stupid stuff, or by studying. Like, I spent, as I had mentioned, system design. I spent hours studying the economics of a game called Mule by Danny Barry, trying to understand how that worked. I spent years studying civilization. I spent decades studying the Dungeon Master's Guide.
What do you, by studying, you mean you're trying to work out
how
the system
did they do
works?
what they did?
Yeah.
How did they do what they did?
Mm-hmm.
Because there weren't really books. Like right now, I'm writing a book with Ian Schreiber about game balance. Mm-hmm. And to my knowledge, there's not a book about game balance. You know, and here we are 40 years in, and it's sort of this dark art. Like, how do you balance it? You the spreadsheet, I don't know, and you hope, you pray, you light candles. And so which chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4, not really. I learned how to do game design by playing games. Mm-hmm. I learned, and analyzing them. I would wait for, like, I call it the hook. Where I grew up, there was fish. We fished a lot, but I would wait, you know, like when you set the hook, when you're catching a fish. Sorry to be so gross. But I would wait. I would set something on my phone, like I'd set an alarm to go off. I'm playing whatever game, and I'd set an alarm to go off. And then I'd stop and I'd think, what am I thinking about right now? What is in my head right now? What do I want? So what the game state in my head is what? What have they succeeded in doing? What is it that I want? And I would obsessively analyze things. I still do this. Like, I always use this same thing as an example, but John and I will, like on the way here, we were talking about how this game called Florence subverts the UI, expected UI of an iPhone, and how it's complete. You would never say, do this thing. Like if somebody said, here's what I'm going to do, what do you think? You'd go, that's stupid. And it's absolutely brilliant. They subverted John and I, we've had a conversation really at 2 o'clock in the morning where I was talking about how it's fascinating that if you have lines versus dots, how that'll change the player's perspective. This is why we can only be married to each other. But I still obsessively analyze like good gameplay. Studied World of Warcraft. I think World of Warcraft is a masterwork of game design. Everything you need to know is in that game.
It was, I'm going to do it now myself now, that idea of just stopping mid whatever you're doing and think, oh, what is my game state right now is a...
Like what's it making you care about?
Yeah, well, how am I feeling? What's if anyone came up to me, what would influence how I was talking back to them? What would influence what I wanted? All of those things. But as soon as you said that, I understood what you meant because we're both games players. But that also makes me realise that that for you probably see the whole of life as a game.
I do.
You're constantly wondering, like, what's the system behind this? What are the dynamics behind this conversation? And you've got this sort of meta-analysis going on.
Yeah, probably. I mean, but I've been a game designer since I was 5. Mm-hmm. So I'm probably just a broken human being, right? Like I don't really know. I mean, I don't mean that. I think I've had the luckiest life. It occurred to me not too long ago that I was looking for possibilities for jobs for my students, and I realized like I'm never going to have to do that again. Mm. Like I will literally go from first job to last job as a game designer, and that's the coolest life that anybody could possibly have, maybe except for being a heavy metal singer. but I'm young, right? I can still possibly do that. I can't sing, so good luck. But I feel like that's been a really cool thing, and I do see things. Like I remember I was driving through Houston, Texas, on my way to GDC. I don't care to fly, and I was driving to Houston, Texas, through there, and there had just been a hurricane. So gas was in really short supply, and I thought, all right, I'm going to get off at the second exit and go left. And I was able to get gas, because most human beings will get off at the first exit and go right, which is why when you're playing a level, always go left. Our children are screwed. As two game design parents, both of us system designers, good luck trying to pull anything over on us. We will recognize anything out of pattern instantly. Happened, Therese, just before we came over here. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. You see the 4 previous clues that they provided. But yeah, probably I see everything like that.
So actually, I've got a killer question for you that I've really been desperate to put to you, which is, I wrote it down because I want to get this right. Okay. So I want to know that if the games industry was a game, what are the rules? What's the winning condition? That's really hard, isn't it?
Wow, you think you've heard every question. The answer came to me pretty immediately, and I thought there's got to be a better one. But I'm going to stick with it. I think the winning condition, this is going to sound like such a silly answer, but it's love. Like, I absolutely love games. I love game design. I think it's more beautiful than paint. I think I can do anything I want with a game. I can feel a game, I can make analog games, I can touch them, I can change them. I mean, games are math, they're words, they're moving pictures. They're things that happen on a screen, but they also happen in your head. And that a game in itself, like a game requires this active participation of another human being, and in that space is where it happens. And I just think there's such unbelievably beautiful things. I've never made a game for money, not once. The game that I'm best known for was a 100% money loss. I'm not going to sell it. I will donate it to a museum at some point. It's one of my analog games. And anybody that I know who's actually made something that we truly would uphold as great did it for love and not money. And they still love games. So like the people who came in, like the social game, Facebook game things, these were the web guys who were just sashaying on through, and they're like, whoa, we can make millions off of this. And they made a bunch of games, and they made millions, and then they went, oh, wait, education, and then they just health, and then they floated on by. But everybody that I know who's been profoundly successful at games did it because they love it. And so, like, if you're making games because you want to get rich, that's great if that happens. But like, I wouldn't be here if I didn't deeply love it. I feel like I got just such a great gift being in this industry. Just the greatest thing. I think it's like that is the people who are winning love games.
That's a pretty difficult winning condition to set up in a game system.
If it's a really good game, it's not.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, though? I do think, funny enough, like there's a ton of characters that people pay for every single month on World of Warcraft that they don't actually play, but they just pay for them because it's sort of like, it's like childcare, I guess. I do not know where, and I'm hoping that it's somewhere in our archives. I have my red 5 1/4 disc with my original Wizardry characters on it. I mean, you can tell me that they're just data, but they're not. I spent a lot of hours with those characters. And how many of you have dice? How many of you have dice that you think have betrayed you? Right? See? Absolutely, totally illogical. But how many of you really believe it? Right, see? And the ones who didn't raise their hands are like, I believe it, but I'm not going to look like a fool. But yeah, so I think, and people have favorite dice and favorite games. Like I've seen people in the game industry come up to John crying,
Mm.
just saying Doom changed my life. And, it's
so I connection.
Yeah, so I think, games, you can't connect to them. You have to connect to them to get them going,
Yeah.
right? Because like if you just put a box of Assassin's Creed there, it's just going to sit there. But if you want to connect to a game, you have to get it going. Like Edith Finch, I finished playing Edith Finch, and I just cried. And I didn't cry because of the story. I cried because I recognized that I had just completed a masterwork, right? Like I didn't make the game, but I just finished playing a masterwork.
Was that the first game you've ever cried at the end of? I found it really
I think
moving.
so.
I didn't cry.
I think so. I did because it was the same reason that, for instance, like I guess like I'm not necessarily prone to crying at really sad things.
Well, I cried at Mega Man 2, at the end of Mega Man 2, so it's like, you know.
So when I went to see Ray Charles play, every time, I've seen Ray Charles play several times, and every time I saw Ray Charles play, just because he's a master, and like I recognize that this is something that's just, this is masterful. And I can't help but tear up at that beauty, right? Like if I see a really beautiful artwork, I can't help but tear up at that. And I recognize that in Edith Finch, I had just played through, and I did it in one sitting. And I recognized, like, my God, this is just a masterwork.
It is so powerful, isn't it? That sort of the game that you can play in one sitting. And I think people appreciate it as they get older as well. It's like I always think that when my kids are like, "Oh, look, there's hundreds of hours of gameplay, yay!" And then I'm like, "Oh, there's only 5 hours of gameplay, yay!" Because you can finish it. I mean, do your kids play games as well?
Oh God, help us, yeah. Yeah, there's Donovan is probably the most hardcore player in the house. Donovan and Mesa, they all play. So Lilia, going in order, Michael is actually, he's in the game industry. He turned 30. And then he's a programmer in the game industry. And then there's Steven, who's a hardcore game player. And then there's Lilia, who, Lilia is the spokesperson for the family because the rest of us are playing games. Lilia loves tourism, entertainment, events, is a singer, so she's got her own thing. So she's the normal one. She's the one we'll send out to meet other families. Then there's Mesa, who's got several level 100s in World of Warcraft. Then there's Avalon, whose entire life presently is devoted to Overwatch. And then there's Donovan, who's just, Donovan's basically sort of a clone. Donovan plays, right now he's Battlefield Stellaris. Oh God, he went mental over Stellaris recently, yeah. But Donovan's a really hardcore gamer. But our kids, like, they have normal lives. Like, their computers shut off at a specific time. They can only have so much games. If they screw up, they will have all their stuff taken away from them. I made a game called Respect Dollar, where Donovan had everything he owned taken away. And he had to ask every member of the family if he was nice to them that day, and if he was, they gave him a respect dollar, and he could buy his stuff back with it. So it's not great to have game designers as parents sometimes.
There are a lot of systems going on
Yeah,
in
but
your
we
house,
play, like
yeah.
we play D&D with the kids, we play board games with the kids. We have, it's funny because at the end of the year, I'm on a couple voting bodies for awards. And so the kids know that I'm going to get a ton of free codes for games.
Brilliant, yeah.
Right? So I have to play through them all, but they're just like, no, I want to play. And so yeah, they're pretty lucky that way. But it's a pretty hardcore gaming household.
I just wondered if I should open up some questions to the floor. Has anyone got a question? Not about Wizardry, we've done that. Yeah, at the front.
Have you ever created your own homebrew D&D before?
Yes, twice. So when I rewrote Rollmaster, it evolved. Evolved is a kind word. It changed so much that we called it Brenda Law. And I threw it away at some point in time. I deeply regret that. So that was the first time that I did that. With the kids, we started them playing. Where did he go?
He just disappeared.
He's supposed to help me with this question. With the kids, it was really fun. What? Obviously, I bored him. With the kids, we started playing. I think they were around 6, and they wanted to start playing D&D, but it was too complex. So we basically just made rules up as we went along, and we're still playing this made-up Saturday night RPG thing with them. I've been asked to create like one-page RPGs before, And I will see if I ever do it. But usually, like I'm working, like the systems that I'm creating for the game that I'm working on now, that's a full homebrew. All of my games before they're digital, I play them in analog. So every single game I've made has had some kind of homebrew-ish D&D thing, including the one I'm working on now.
Any more? Well, it's your next door. Yeah.
So when you went to the BAFTA Games, how did it feel winning the BAFTA?
Oh my God. I don't even still know that I have a word for that, right? Like since he's out of the room, like it felt really weird to win a BAFTA when you're, now I'm not saying that I haven't done things, right? But it's, here I'm with a guy who's made 150 games. And I kept thinking like, I don't know, like I don't feel like I've done enough. So it felt very, very surreal. It still feels surreal, like when I look at it and think, I won a BAFTA. It's very surreal. Like it's like when you say, like, I don't have a word for it really. Like it's a huge honor. Like honor isn't the right word, nor is huge. It's.
You're trying to work out your game state.
Yeah, it hasn't been a full year yet. And like I said, I just still don't really genuinely feel worthy of it. And I don't know that anybody who wins one ever really will, right? I can tell you what I was thinking about when I won it. My number one concern was, don't trip over my dress. And then I had a dress that was strapless, and I was like, please, 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 God, please, God, please. And I wasn't actually praying, but I just didn't want to have like the moment of all moments where Brenda Romero going to get her BAFTA, her dress falls off. And so when I got up on stage, I'm like, thank God it didn't fall off. And then when I got up on stage, and you can actually, like if you hear the replay of it, I hadn't meant for it to be loud enough for anybody to hear, but I said, don't faint. Because if I get really, now he's back in the room, but like when John proposed to me, I fainted. And he knew I was going to do it. He suspected I might faint, rather. So he made sure that he asked me when I was sitting down, and sure enough, I fainted. So I was just like, don't faint. But it's unbelievably surreal. Like Tim Schafer's getting it this year.
Oh, really?
And I think he'll have the same experience. Yeah, it's crazy. It's just, the even more exciting part of it for me really is that, like, having come through the whole like, you make video games, like, is that a real thing? And like, games are bad for you. Games cause all these problems. Games are the worst thing ever made. Games are horrible. To have an organization like BAFTA recognize them along with film and TV, I've said it several times, but to me that is the single most important cultural thing that's happened to video games. That when BAFTA said we're going to recognize them on par with other forms of media, that was amazing. And for me to get one, that's ridiculous. But BAFTA's done, they have absolutely done so much for games.
Yeah.
And I volunteer with them regularly. I did that before I got the BAFTA too. It wasn't.
What do you do?
Well,
as
like
a
on different
volunteer?
awards bodies, or if they're doing judging, or also
they have a good young game developer.
so the Breakthrough
scheme, don't they?
Brits. Yeah. So I'm currently mentoring a woman who was one of BAFTA's Breakthrough Brits this year, and John and I went over also to their office, in Piccadilly.
Yeah.
So.
Any more questions?
Originally, I was going to ask you who you were wearing at the BAFTAs, but what I'll probably say, I assume you know who Jerry Ellsworth is.
Of course, yeah.
It sounds like yourself and Jerry got quite a similar start. She, growing up as a kid, maybe didn't have too much money around the family, and she would make her own games as well, like you, collecting a dice here, a piece there, a board there. What she would do is make a pinball machine, but she'd use bits of cardboard, bits of wood, an oddball, and she'd use a calculator as the scoreboard. So she'd do a 1 + 1 equals, and then every target on the pinball would hit the equals sign, so it increases by 1 all the time. But then she would get into more the hardware side, and I don't know your relative ages, but going into the telephone network and hacking that and looking how things like that work. Did you ever get into the hardware side? Did you ever stray from the straight and narrow to find out how something worked?
Did I ever? And I didn't know that story about her. I'm going to be doing some Googling on that tonight. That's great. Did I ever get into that? I didn't. But I do remember, like, there was this one really weird moment, which I debated even talking about tonight. I remember when I was playing Civilization, it's 1991. Now, mind you, like, I'm already in the game industry as a kid, so I know everything there is to know about Wizardry. I mean, literally, that was my first job. But I remember I was playing Civ, and I was fascinated by what's happening, and I remember doing this. So this is the monitor here, right? And I remember doing this. And now it was a completely, it was an automatic movement, but I wanted to see, like, what's going on back there, right? And which as soon as I did it, it was like, oh, I can't believe I did that, right? It's like if you've been using an iPad or your phone for a while, and then you sit down with your computer and you touch the screen and you go, oh, what am I doing? Or if you've got, like, clicker keys for your car and you walk up to your house and go, open. So I was sort of doing the same kind of thing, but I was looking around and like, how does this work? And I wanted to see how it worked. I didn't get into that. Now this is ridiculous, but as I'm thinking about what passes for a retirement with a game developer, which just means I'm going to make what I want on nobody's schedule. John and I have got 2 Apple IIs, and we're trying to get them running because I want to learn 6502 assembly in my retirement, as I'm sure everybody does.
It's on my list as well.
Yeah, so now we're actually going through some of the hardware stuff, but I never messed around with anything, and this is probably as close as I've gotten to trying to make these things work.
Great, thanks. Any more questions? I've got a couple more. Oh, here we go.
So in your presentation earlier, you mentioned that you often get the questions what it feels like to be a woman in tech or women behind the games. Do you have any good comeback to that to bring people back to the proper question that they should ask about game design instead of the gender-related thing?
You know, it's funny because it's like I think there's now actually better answers than there used to be. Like, people will often now ask me more specific questions, but I often will, if somebody says I would like to do an article on you as a woman in games, I'll say, here, I'll make it, how about we just do an article on me? Or how about we just do an article on this game, right? And I don't think we need to call attention to the fact that I'm a woman. Like, they wouldn't do, like, can you imagine, like, mother of 4? What's it like to be a mother of 4 in games? Like, it just sounds stupid, right? What's it like to be a straight person in games? Right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So I will often redirect it, but then there's other times where it can potentially be really powerful. Like, I volunteer with an organization called I Wish that basically puts such a cool thing. It's in Ireland, and it's these 2 women, and they basically, if you can just imagine being 13, 14, and going to a concert. So there's like lights on the stage doing this, and it looks written. There's big speakers, and there's 4 women who are going to come out and talk about tech. But it looks like a concert. There's like really cool music playing, and so the girls are just coming out of school. They're in their transition year, so like 4th year, and so they get women up talking about things, and I come out and I'm talking about being a female game designer, and to them it's like, you're a rock star, right? And they are just excited for that. So I find sometimes it's like super, super useful. I think there have been, am I being recorded right now?
Yeah.
Shit. Okay. There have been times where people are like, what's it like to be a woman in games? I'm like, oh, that's my boobs. Hold on. All right. I don't think they don't know. You know, like, and then I can like actually go to the next level. Why don't you ask what it's like to be a man in games, or something like that? But it depends. Like, I don't want to embarrass people, right? And when they ask me the question, there's sometimes like, I don't know. Like, I can tell you what it's like to be me in games. Okay? Like, I can't speak for everybody. And that's probably the most normal comeback I have. I have other ones that, because I'm being recorded, that are funnier, but I'm not going to tell you.
The situation is improving, isn't it? I mean...
It depends.
Oh, okay.
It depends. I mean, I think there's certainly more women than there ever were in the industry. I think the game industry is a fantastic place to work. I think now, like, the fact that I can name multiple games where you can have a female avatar. I can name multiple games where you have non-binary avatars. I can name games with gay characters. I can name game, you know, like, it's not like it used to be, right? Like, we don't really have that image of the, you know, the bunch of white guys. Like, it's changing. So I think people are certainly more aware of it. They're more aware of different play styles. Like, if we look at Dishonored, you can go through all of Dishonored without causing damage to anybody. And so games are broadening, and they have to, because they're really expensive to make, and more people want to play games. We need more people to play games so that we can continue to make them. But when we see games like Inside or like Edith Finch, getting nominated for and winning BAFTAs, those are sending really powerful signals. Or Night in the Woods. Night in the Woods cleaned up at the IGF this year, So the more people make those games, the more people who will play different types of games.
So it's slowly, you feel it's slowly getting better.
When I first got in the industry, there were 5 women, and I knew all of them. And I don't, like, for instance, I'm sure I don't know most women in the industry right now.
I remember walking around like games exhibitions, and if you saw a woman at all, she wasn't. She was like a model hired to be in the exhibition or so forth. It was all men, wasn't it? And now, when I remember I went to the Minecraft, the London Minecraft a couple of years ago, and I almost fell over how many, just how diverse it was, how many. How female it was actually, and I certainly pick up the feeling that it's certainly the public are broadening out.
Well, certainly game players are. I mean, games are much more normal to play now. And I would say, I think the players are, I don't know exactly what the demographics are, but there's certainly a lot more female players. And I know my kids haven't heard in quite a long time that girls don't play games. I mean, when you're talking about going to like the Minecraft thing, like in the early days of the game industry at CES, when we first started going to shows, like CES predates E3 and GDC, at CES games shared a floor with porn, right? So there was porn on one half of the floor and then VCRs in games. And that was the floor. So it was incredibly interesting working conditions. And nowadays, we graduated to our own conference, and maybe porn graduated to their own conference. I don't know, but I haven't kept up with my friends there. But yeah, no, I don't. To me, like I've had a really good run of it. And it's certainly not just. I'm just speaking out in areas where I feel like I can make a difference. Like I know John has done. When we lived in California especially, he would do lots of speaking at schools that had predominantly Spanish-speaking or Mexican students. He's, recently Elizabeth Lepense has been, she is, I guess she's, I don't want to say the ringleader, but Elizabeth is very well known in the indigenous games community. And so, more and more I'm seeing John, mentions of John being a Native American person and having made games, because often when people think of Native American people, they're not necessarily thinking about technology, right? But yet Native Americans are at the very beginning of many, many technologies.
And you yourself have broadened out as well, not just to different audiences, but to different kinds of games, haven't you? So I don't think you would really. I mean, art pieces really. I'm talking about your analog games that are. Well, they're more than games, though, aren't they? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. There's 6 of them, and they're about difficult subject matter. So, I call them documentary games, but I wanted to try to make games about the most difficult moments in human history. And so at this point, I've made 3 of them, and I'm 10,000 probably pieces away from finishing my game on the Trail of Tears, so 50,000 individually painted pieces.
Wow.
Don't ever do it. It's a crazy idea. But yeah.
And these might be on show at some
at some
show
point,
at different places.
Well, one of my games, a game called Shiakan Lot, is currently in the National Museum of Play in the States. Train is going to go on long-term loan there as well. I still don't know where I'm even going to release a 50,000 piece game. So that game, I don't know. And then I'll start build. I have 2 games left to
Does it
build.
take up a lot of space? I mean,
It
much
will.
space does
I
it
don't
take
know. I haven't measured on purpose.
Up? Yeah.
I mean, there's like a game design reason I haven't measured, but it's because I want to see it. I want every single one of these pieces to be thought of as an individual, because the Trail of Tears, the Native Americans were not thought of as individuals. They were thought of as thing that needed to be moved. And so I want every person, every one of these 50,000, it's called one false for each of us, so it's literally a 1-to-1 ratio. And so if I start measuring, if I measure 100 of them, then I figure out what space 100 of them measure, then I can figure out how much space 50,000 of them measured. And then I've already reduced them to groups of 100. And I'm saying that they individually don't matter. So and there was a museum who was interested in doing it, so I gave them the dimensions of 1. But I told them not to let me know the answer on whether they could even support it or not. Because I don't want to know. I want to see every single one as an individual. And then I will see them all at once. And I don't even expect anybody to play the game. Because it's 50,000 pieces, and you have to move every one of them if you want to play it, just as was done to the Native Americans. So somebody suggested that I should glue 1,000 to different sheets, right? Because it would be easier on the player. And my literal answer was fuck them. If you want to play this game, I really want you to look at 50,000 individual human beings and realize that every one of these people was displaced. And so I like the brutal power in that.
I can see the power of that's not going to work as a computer game.
It couldn't work as a computer game.
It's going to work in a space.
No, it couldn't. In fact, part of it is in the rules, so the rules they're in my head, but I'll write them once and then they'll be out. You can actually, so if somebody is Native American, which I just love this, if somebody's Native American, they can actually come and take a piece and take the seat of that and be a pawn in the game. And what I love about that is I just imagine it's one thing to say Native Americans were displaced from their land. It's a totally different thing to look at somebody like John and actually ask him to move when you're playing this game. And that's it's absolutely horrible. It's horrible, and I want people to, that is the kind of feeling that I want people to have.
I mean, I think you put it that the mechanic is the message.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's easy for us now to study horrible moments in human history and to see them as a bunch of text or pictures, right? But when you actually are looking in the face of somebody whose genetics, culture, who they are ties them directly to that, right? That makes it all the more powerful. But games can reproduce those systems. Have I depressed everybody?
I'm just thinking that it must be very difficult designing a game.
It's
like
horrible.
That. I mean,
yeah.
because you're sort of thinking when you're designing, a fun game, your idea, you're thinking of the player experience the whole time, aren't you? You're thinking how they're going to feel.
Well, I mean, I'm still
how
thinking
you want
of
to
that
think, How you
too.
want to feel, but generally speaking, we're kind of like you want to feel adrenaline and fun. But with a game like this, with a message. A real life game with a real life message. How are you thinking about the player and what they're going to get out of it?
I'm making myself feel it. I'm like I did. Let's see
I mean, do you want to change? Is the ultimate thing to change how people see the world, or?
No, I mean it's the ultimate thing is just to make it. Okay. And I don't know what I'm not really in charge of what happens once it's made, but for some reason, I don't know, for some reason, his thing, he got Doom, right? If we just imagine the universe handing out little packages, the universe said, you like game design, you get a diamond, there's Doom, enjoy it. And for some reason, I got you get to make people cry with games, right? and I'm okay with that. The games, I was being interviewed just before this, and I said, well, depending on how you count it, there's 6 or 7 games, and the mechanic is a message. And the 7th game is actually the first game, which is called Black Box. But I went through this situation, I went through the fall of 2006. It was pretty bad for me. I got attacked in quite a bad way. And I remember just days, my whole goal for the day was breathe. Just breathe. Like if you can succeed in breathing, to the end of the day, you've made it. And I remember just trying to figure out, like, why would, not, without going into too much detail, like, how could people do this to somebody, right? And in going through that, and because I'm not prone to think of it any other way, like if we just pause games and we think Eric Clapton for a minute, like the song Tears in Heaven was a song he wrote about his son's death, right? He's a musician, that's how he processes things. Writers process things in other ways. For me, I process things in games. And so I started thinking about systems of pain, right? And how would this happen? Why would people do these things? And so I guess I'm unlucky, but lucky in that I'm comfortable sitting and like feeling a tremendous volume of emotion, I guess, right? And like, I'm okay looking into the darkness, I guess, into like, not darkness isn't the right term, but into like just something that doesn't feel good. And trying to pull something out of that because I'm not any other type of artist that I can make in game form. And so for me, I think these games were, to see that games could do something more, this medium that I've literally devoted my life to, that they can do something, not that there's anything wrong with Mario and bouncing on platforms, but that games could also be transformative to people. That games could also not just represent, let's go to space and blow shit up, right? Like that games could, not that there's anything wrong with going to space and blowing shit up, but that games could also really show profound moments in human history, that they could teach people about these things, that they could make people complicit, that they could show you something in a way that would make you part of it.
Well, I would really love to play them, so I'm going to keep an eye on your website. I guess you announce on your website if any of your artworks are being exhibited, where they're being exhibited.
I do.
What's the best way to find out for?
Just on Twitter,
Okay.
at BR. It's just my my initials or my handle.
Up there on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. Now, looking at the time, I think I've run over a bit longer than I anticipated. And also I'm aware that you probably want to have a look at some of these. You said earlier that you dragged you away from.
Well, no, you're fine. There's a guy speaking tomorrow night, so I'll be here geeking around.
You get a chance to geek around. But I think we've probably come to the end of our time. Yep, brilliant. One more question? Okay, go on, go.
I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the 4 quotes behind you on the wall. I particularly like the 2 on the right there. So just bearing in mind where we've come from and where we are now, where do you think we'll be in 40, 50 years' time in the games industry? What's your vision of the industry? Will VR be a thing that sticks around, or will it just come around every 10 years and be a fad for a while? Or do you...
It was about 5 questions. It was. Well, I could cheat and just say I just gave you the answer. And that would be my vision from the future. And a woman invented what I just used to get the answer to you. That may have been kind of weird, but I'm just making a joke that only I get apparently. Where I think, the game industry, I think we're still going to be, my guess is 10 years, all right, so 50 years in the future, my guess is microtrans will be government regulated. That loot boxes, you're not going to be able to get away with that. People are going to look at that as more, that'll probably be toast. I think narrative games are going to continue to get bigger and bigger. I think, my God, might we stop hearing, yeah, but it's not a game. Right? Especially because I remember people saying that Wizardry wasn't a game because D&D was a game. And I remember when the console guys showed up and we went, consoles, computer games are real games. Anyway, so I think people would just stop thinking of games as, I think we'll stop hearing that. I would love to see, I think we're going to start seeing games being made for a huge range of people. Like, I don't feel like there's games being made, I don't even know what they would be really. But like, are there really, I don't know that there's games about topics that are important to me as a 51-year-old woman, things that maybe I've been through that I've never seen a game about. And it's just because there's probably 1 or 2 51-year-old game makers. I don't know. But I think we'll start seeing a huge, like, I think games, topic-wise, will be as broad as books. And we're nowhere near there yet. John will still probably be winning shooters. VR, I think, like right now, VR just, it doesn't feel like we're ready for VR yet. You know, I'm not willing to dish out.
Have you done much? Have you done a lot?
Nothing.
Got it at home or?
We have a PlayStation VR at home, and there's like enough games that it feels fun. But I also I feel like whenever I put a VR thing on it right now, I still feel like this weird octopus from the swamp, right? Because I'm like tethered with all these different things. I think AR is tremendous. I mean, AR has already proven itself with Pokemon Go alone, right? Where will we be? I don't know. This is the question that's always like, how do you want to be made a fool of in 50 years? So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I never would have imagined we were here, right? Like I was going to just be in the game industry for 4 years until I went to college, and then I might as well stay in while I go to college, and then I'll get a real job, and I still haven't got a real job.
Great, thank you, and thank you.
Thank you.
And yeah.
Thanks for coming, everybody. All
And,
right.
and Wizardry's at the back in case anyone wants to beat that 10th wizard on the boss on the 10th level. Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.